Go into the world and tell every man that you meet, there is a man on the cross.
A Catholic Take. What you need to know right now. A bold synthesis of inspiration and information. Keeping you up to date on the news and issues from a courageous Catholic perspective.
A Catholic Take with Joe McLean starts now.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McLean, and it is great to be on with you. Praise be to God. It's Thanksgiving week here in America, so be thankful this week, wherever you are. We're going to have a great conversation today about leveraging the power of the sacraments. Shaun McAfee has come out with a compendium of Sacramentals by Tan Books. It's a great book, actually. Could make an excellent present on a number of occasions. I could see, this is like a wedding present to a young couple or a new family. There's lots of options here. But I think one of the things it does that I thought was incredibly fascinating was deal with the issue of syncretism. We're going to talk about that coming up at 14 past the hour. Do join us. Shaun McAfee will be on with us. Mike Koeniger, friend of the show, is on the program. He's going through something my wife and I went through many years ago now, and that is adoption. It is a roller coaster ride, to say the least. We're going to talk about adoption as Catholics at 30 past the hour. Do join us for that as well. We are going to share lots of stories in the news and even have an after show where you get to drive the conversation. We'll talk about whatever is on your heart, your mind. And we, of course, will share links with everything in the show notes today at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Let's pray. Let's get started. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thine intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come. Before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And now your saint of the day.
Saint Felix of Valois. Felix was born in 1127 in France, most likely in the province of Valois, though a few accounts claim he was actually related to the royal family of the same name. From an early age, he was virtuous and generous to the poor. Though he was wealthy, he renounced all his possessions when he became an adult and retired to the life of a hermit in a deep forest. A young Parisian nobleman and priest, the future St. John of Malta, heard of Felix's sanctity and joined him in his hermitage. Before long, however, God sent an angel to inspire the two hermits to a more active vocation. Some accounts state that the angel came in the form of a white stag with a blue and red cross between its antlers. Felix and John were directed to go to Rome and request from Pope Innocent III the permission to begin a new religious order, hearkening back to a vision John had received during his first Mass. After careful consideration, prayer, and fasting, and a similar vision to that of St. John, the Pope approved the Order of the Most Holy Trinity and of the Captives, known as the Trinitarians, with a red and blue cross as their symbol. This order, dedicated to the redemption of captives, especially from the Turks, grew exponentially under the leadership of St. John, the Superior General, and of St. Felix, who directed expansion in France after building the mother house of the order in the same wilderness where he and John had been hermits. After much successful hard work, the elderly Felix died in the year 1212. His sainthood was confirmed in 1666, with his traditional feast day fixed to November 20th. In the modern calendar, he is celebrated on November 4th, the day of his passing. St. Felix of Valois, pray for us.
And now your headline news. The Associated Press reports Pope Francis meets with trans women. On Sunday, men who identify as women, many of whom are Latin American migrants and work as prostitutes, joined over 1,000 other poor and homeless people in the Vatican Auditorium as Francis's guest for lunch to mark the Catholic Church's World Day of the Poor. Prominent LGBTQ plus organizations have welcomed Francis's message of inclusivity, given gay and transgender people have long felt ostracized and discriminated against by a church that officially teaches that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. Starting from his famous "Who am I to judge" comment back in 2013 about a purportedly gay priest, to his assertion in January that being homosexual is not a crime, Francis has seemingly evolved his position to increasingly make it clear that everyone is a child of God, loved by God, and welcomed in the church. No mention of repentance or dying to self or putting away your sins and becoming, a Christian. Nothing like that in the article. Anyway, moving on. NCR reports anti-Christian hate crimes in Europe are up 44% over the past year. The Vienna-based Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe on Thursday released its annual report detailing the spike in anti-Christian incidents, up 44%, which is connected to the rise in extremist motivation and a higher acceptance of targeting of churches. In its release Thursday, the watchdog org said arson attacks on churches increased by 75% between 2021 and 2022. The report also revealed legal discrimination against Christians who express traditional Christian worldviews. The top 5 countries for anti-Christian hate crimes, the report said, were Germany, Italy, France, Spain, and Poland. The United Kingdom and Austria were also near the top of the list. An insider reports Milei wins Argentina election with 56% of the vote. Libertarian outsider Javier Milei swept to victory in Argentina's presidential election Sunday, vowing to halt decades of economic decline in a country reeling from triple-digit inflation. Latin America's third biggest economy has suffered decades of crisis under interventionist governments big on welfare that resort to money printing to finance spending, fueling inflation while borrowing heavily on to default on their debt later. Milei's plan, his main platform has been to ditch the ailing peso for the U.S. dollar, dynamite the central bank to do away with the cancer of inflation. He is against abortion, vowed to cut ties with China and Brazil. He insulted Pope Francis, questioned the death toll under Argentina's brutal dictatorship, and says humans are not behind climate change. And those are your headline news. The gospel today comes to us from Luke chapter 18, verses 35 through 43. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging, and hearing a crowd going by, he inquired what was happening. They told him, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." He shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." The people walking in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." Then Jesus stopped and ordered that he be brought to him. And when he came near, Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" He replied, "Lord, please let me see." Jesus told him, "Have sight. Your faith has saved you." He immediately received his sight and followed him, giving glory to God. And when they saw this, all the people gave praise to God. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. The commentary today, the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible, said Mark calls him Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus. Ironically, this blind beggar saw Jesus' identity more clearly than the crowds who rebuked him. Isn't that something? Could you imagine? Like, the guy wants Jesus to help him out, and people are like, "Shut up! Stop talking! You're bothering us!" Like, good grief. Like, let that sink in about knuckleheads like the rest of us who can sometimes stand in the way, right? Morally speaking, St. Augustine says the crowd signifies fellow believers who walk with Christ and yet sometimes hinder our progress in the spiritual life. We must strive, like the blind man, to overcome their discouragement and make growth in virtue our spoken prayer to Christ. I think it's important for us to remember, when someone's striving for Christ, we need to encourage that. We need to encourage them to come closer to Christ. I need to come closer to Christ, and I would hope that you would encourage me to do so, to grow deeper in relationship with the Lord, in praying that will result in a complete conversion on my part, right? I mean, that's the goal. St. Gregory the Great said, because the disciples, being yet carnal, were unable to receive the words of mystery, they are brought to a miracle. Before their eyes, a blind man receives his sight, that by a divine work their faith might be strengthened. St. Cyril of Alexandria said, for he speaks of Christ as God, yet calls him Son of David. But they marveled at the justice of his confession, and some even wished to prevent him from confessing his faith. But by checks of this kind, his ardor was not damped. For faith is able to resist all and to triumph over all. It is a good thing to lay aside shame in behalf of divine worship. For if for money's sake some are bold, it is not fitting, when the soul is at stake, to put on a righteous boldness. The voice of one invoking in faith stops Christ, for he looks back upon them who call upon him in faith. And accordingly, he calls the blind man to him and bids him draw nigh, that he in truth, who had first laid hold of him in faith, might approach him also in the body. What in the world is St. Cyril of Alexandria trying to say? He's trying to say persevere under all circumstances, under all difficulties and challenges, that the resistance you might face in life, in family, in your coworkers, in your community, in your own scrupulosity, you must persevere through it all to pursue Christ above all. Love God above everything else. Be prepared to walk away from everything on planet Earth in love of God. That is the decision we must make. And when we make that decision, we have great peace. We have resignation. When the world is in chaos, our neighbors are in fear and anxiety, you can have peace by being totally resigned to the divine will. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk about the sacramentals and how they help you accomplish just that. Be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. So good to be on with you. Coming up at 30 past the hour, we're going to talk about adoption, something my wife and I went through many years ago. And our good friend, Mike Koeniger, friend of the show, he's going through it as well. It's an emotional roller coaster ride, to say the least. And we're going to be having that conversation from a Catholic perspective at 30 past the hour. Do join us if you can. I received this book from TAN Publishing called Compendium of Sacramentals. The sacramentals, I believe, are a secret weapon that we can leverage to grow in holiness and to help convert the world. And here to talk about that is Shaun McAfee from epicpew.com, who also wrote this book. Shaun, good morning to you. Thanks for your time today.
Good morning to you as well. Thank you.
Praise be to God. This is a very interesting book. It's, one of the first things I noticed just right out of the gate and looking at it is it can pass for like a coffee table book that you could just leave out, when you're Jehovah's Witnesses and knock at the door and you welcome them in, just like leave that right out there next to the statue of Our Lady to just give it to them really good. And then, of course, you're going to want to put the green scapular under the couch, maybe a miraculous medal on the back, on the table or something, just so that when they get there, there is they're surrounded by the powerhouse. I could also see this being like a great wedding guest, a wedding gift to like a young couple. This could be a powerful gift to them as they start their marriage, or even a Christmas gift. I could see it being used in many ways. Was that sort of your intention by the way that this book is designed and published through TAN?
Well, TAN actually pitched me the beautiful idea. I just pitched them the content. So maybe a little bit of both. And I like your first comment that it's a secret weapon. So I hope that it doesn't just sit there. I hope that we can actually use it as Catholics and learn to appreciate these sacramentals.
So let's dive into the sacramentals. There's several aspects about the book that I found utterly fascinating. But just for definition's sake, because we're going to run out of time faster than we think, what are sacramentals versus sacraments?
Right. So sacramentals are the signs, devotions, exorcisms, and blessings that dispose us to receive the sacraments. They don't have an effect themselves other than disposing our hearts and moving us. So we stare at crucifixes. We believe in the images on our medals. We do our pious devotions like the Rosary, Sacred Heart, like you said, the green scapular. And those are supposed to move us to receive sacramental grace through the sacraments.
There are lots of teachable moments in the book when it comes to the sacramentals. One is you make distinctions on like there's a lot of different things that we use that are ordinary things that can become sacramentals. Water, I think, is an example of that. Ordinary object, but it has powerful. In fact, St. Teresa of Avila, according to your quote in the book, it was the greatest weapon against devils to get them to leave and stay away was the use of holy water. But you also make the distinction that not just anything can become a sacramental. Can you speak to that?
Right. So you nailed it the first time. And the church does say this in the documents of Vatican II, that nearly anything can be sacramentalized. But it has to be through, first of all, the approval and the intercession of the church. And I would say that the church probably limits it to things that would have some sort of meaning within a Christological system, within a Christianity, within our Christological thesis, right? So these are things like palm branches. They represent the victory of Christ. We've been doing that for thousands of years. Ashes, these represent penance. We've been doing that for thousands of years. So the church hasn't really approved these, to say, hey, look, here's a new kind of idea. We really like it. These are things that we've really adopted grassroots that point to mysteries or truths that have been around since the dawn of Christianity.
I think one of the other things that was sort of like a duh moment was how the church regulates the use of these sacramentals. I mean, that's obvious, but at the same time, I hadn't ever even considered it, that there is there's a regulation for the use of sacramentals, when and when not to use them, how to use them. And I think a lot of non-Catholics might look at the use of sacramentals and say, oh, that seems weird. It seems like it's just, they can even think it might be even sacrilegious, or it's just, just fanciful myths from legends of histories and past, and we just overdo them all the time. I think that might be at the heart of the use of and the regulation of these sacramentals. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, from all sides, really. And you could go into a deep topic on both sides, or a deep conversation on both sides of those. But I would say that the church does a really good job and tries very honestly to allow us the most freedom possible while not allowing anybody, just anybody to exploit these. So like the white scapular, for example, that's the scapular of the Dominican order. Only Dominicans, promised third order Dominicans, are allowed to wear that along with the Dominican cross. And this is so that the lay Dominicans like myself can identify with having joined that order and made those final promises that'll keep us for the rest of our life. It's kind of a short way of putting it, but yes, I think the church is very wise to limit and assess the way that we use sacramentals.
One of the most interesting things in your book that, I found it utterly fascinating because I just got back from Rome, was the argument over syncretism. And how Catholics seemingly have taken certain things from paganism, from the ancient world, and brought them into Christianity. I'm a convert to the church. I used to think, oh man, look at Constantine having corrupted the church the way he did, bringing all these Catholic ideals. And many Protestants will use that against us today. But you go to Rome, and one of the biggest icons you see there is these obelisks that the empire had shipped over the Mediterranean, 2,000 years ago, and the church left them. In fact, moved them to all of their piazzas and put crosses on top of them. Why would we take certain symbols, certain elements out of paganism and leave them into the church? Why would we do that? You address this in the book. I found it fascinating.
Yeah, I think I address it a few different ways in the book, subtly and explicitly. But the real bottom line is that we do not believe in as Christians that we hold the intellectual property to truth. We have the fullness of truth, but it doesn't mean that other religions aren't pointing to the same ideas, at least, right? So the idea is that we can, first of all, we can take what they take, we can take what other pagan religions believe as riddles, at least, or maybe even at most in some cases. And we can say that Christ answers that riddle. And then what we do with those objects like holy medallions. Pagans used to hold amulets on chains or around their neck or on their bracelets, or even in their pockets. And these would have the images of their God on it. Well, why couldn't we baptize that with the image of our God, especially if it's so effective and reminding us of the truths of our faith? So things like that, the church has been very wise to adopt over time. And what we say baptize, we reconsecrate those for our purposes, even if they might be a similar use that a pagan would have. There is no connection to say that we are these are pagan objects anymore. They're fully Christian. They point to Christian truths.
If you go to San Clemente, which is a block or two away from the Roman Colosseum, it's one of the oldest churches in Rome, and you can go down into history. If you keep going down, you'll go down into history. You'll get to the oldest possible church, and there's a mosaic there of Adam in purgatory, which is utterly fascinating. But you can go down further than that, and you can find a pagan temple down there. Right. And you see that the church built upon that. And you quote St. Gregory the Great in the book, basically saying, listen, if these altars were built to worship demons, how powerful, and I'm paraphrasing here, how powerful would it be if we flip that and actually worship the one true God? I think I'd be in the camp that would argue, bulldoze it down, build on top. But at the same time, Pope Gregory the Great, I think, makes a powerful statement. I do believe it is a powerful thing to demonstrate the conquering of paganism, especially in the hearts of those pagans who have been converted to the faith. It's almost like an aha moment for them to see that clarity in the midst of the confusion of the ancients.
Yeah, I love that quote, and I had to put that in there, and I wanted to use it in multiple places, but the editor kind of, gave me some better guidance on that. But it really does guide a lot of that conversation about that syncretism, versus the style that we see in the church today. And I love that San Clemente reference there. Did get the opportunity to visit there whenever I lived in Italy back in 4 years ago or so. And I don't know that I remember it as well as you do, but I remember the quote and thinking about that quote from St. Gregory the Great at the time, and thinking he also said, hey, if these churches are well constructed, and look at that, they're able to hold up as the base of like 4 layers of church today.
Right. Yes. And they stole the basilicas from the Romans too. Praise be to God. We've used them much better than they ever did. Hey, let's move on to this. Sacramentals for evangelization. I said at the outset of the interview, almost in jest, a scenario which we could leverage the power of sacramentals for the evangelization of others. Putting a green scapular under the couch of so when the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons show up, have them sit down on top of it, But people often will leverage the green scapular or a miraculous medal in ways to evangelize others. St. Maximilian Kolbe, one of my patrons, is famous for this, trying to give out miraculous medals to even Nazi SS soldiers that guarded his monastery before he was hauled off to Auschwitz. Can you touch on that, the use of sacramentals in the work of evangelization?
Sure. There's so many ways to approach that, wouldn't there be? And what we don't want to be is at least superstitious, right? We don't want to be the ones that say, hey, look, just because it's hidden here, it's going to provide some sort of magnetism or something that's going to bring them to the faith. What we want to do is we want to be able to use these objects as ways of pointing to our truths and explaining them, defending them to our Protestant brothers and sisters. They're so close to understanding these truths as you and I were. Right? We're both converts. We were just one step away. And it took me about listening to the rosary and holding one in my hand and probably thinking that it was going to, catch me on fire or something before I realized like what exactly it meant about the 4 Marian dogmas and about it begins and ends with Christ there in the crucifix, what exactly that means. And to kind of put it concisely, I think that sacramentals in the process of evangelization shouldn't be hidden trickery or anything like that, but it can be very, very distinct and moving teaching about the truths of ancient Christianity.
I also tend to think of the sacramentals as a infinitely deep well of mercy. We are in the time of mercy. The time of judgment comes next, so we might as well make as much use as we possibly can at the time of mercy. And the sacramentals feel like that. I've got the brown scapular on. I often wear the miraculous. I think I have the miraculous medal on as well. And we use holy water. I have holy water here. I have the Benedictine medal that's been blessed and with the exorcism rite. I mean, I leverage these things in my daily life all the time. It seems like, golly gee whiz, the Lord has gone above and beyond to give us this infinite well of mercy.
That's exactly right. And that's what sacramentals do. And then we'd kind of put it in that definition right at the very beginning is they signify the effects that move our hearts, that would dispose us to want to receive the sacraments and have a sacramental life. in order to what? In order to rid us of our sin, in order to convict us of our sin, in order to lead us to those moments where we want to receive the sacraments more often, to sanctify us and lead us to heaven.
The book is called Compendium of Sacramentals, Encyclopedia of the Church's Blessing, Signs, and Devotions by Shaun McAfee at epicpew.com. We'll put a link to it, but it's tanbooks.com. You can check it out there. We'll put a link to it in the show notes today. Shaun, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate having you on the team. God bless you and God love you. Check them out at tanbooks.com. Shaun, God bless. Have a great day. All right, we are going to go to a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to talk about adoption. It is a roller coaster ride for parents. Not only is it financially sometimes incredibly difficult, but man, just the process itself is hard to get through. But why is it important to persevere through it all? We're going to have a conversation with Mike Koeniger and the news, all coming up next. Don't go anywhere. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain, and here are your headline news. Fox News reports Arizona street preacher fighting for his life after being shot in the head. Hans Schmidt, 26 years old, a military veteran, a medic, and Christian father of 2 children, was shot Wednesday around 6:15 p.m., according to local authorities. The shooting is under investigation, and authorities are seeking tips to identify who was responsible for the attack. It is unclear at this time, according to authorities, whether Schmidt was targeted or was shot by random act of violence. Paul Sanchez, who works nearby, said that people who passed by Schmidt when he was preaching would scream and curse at him. So far, no arrests have been made in connection with the shooting. Carter Center reports former First Lady Rosalind Carter passes away at age 96. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter, a passionate champion of mental health, caregiving, and women's rights, passed away yesterday at 2:10 p.m. at her home in Plains, Georgia, at the age of 96 years old. She died peacefully with her family by her side. Mrs. Carter was married for 77 years to Jimmy Carter, 39th President of the United States, and the 2002 Nobel Peace Prize recipient, who is now 99 years old. And the Daily Wire reports Rep. Jim Jordan subpoenas the Bank of America over the January 6 attendees. House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan from Ohio subpoenaed the Bank of America over the company's sharing of private financial data with the FBI. Specifically, the bank sent a filing to the FBI after the agency requested the private information of individuals who had been in Washington, D.C. around January 6, 2021. So never forget, the bank just delivered private information. No subpoena, just gave it over when asked. Or I don't even think they were asked. I think they volunteered it. So maybe it's time to fire Big Bank. Those are your headline news. Praise be to God. Hey, I want to just give a special shout out to our iCatholic Radio listeners. Thank you for being on the team. We always love having ICR here. Praise be to God. iCatholic Radio is a mobile app. You can download it free in your iOS or Android app store. Allows you to listen to Catholic radio 24/7, clear as crystal, anywhere on planet Earth. It also allows you to get access to the live video feed right on your phone. It also allows you to get access to our podcasts and so much more. Download it today. Join the team, iCatholic Radio, in your iOS or Android app store today. Praise be to God. Mike Koeniger's back on the show, our friend of the show. We lovingly refer to him as the brick wall. He's a super rigid kind of a guy. But nonetheless, we always invite him back. Good morning to you, Mike K.
Oh yeah, I'm rigid, Semper Gumpy rigid. But anyway,
Semper Gumpy, he says. That's funny. My drill instructors used to say we got to be flexible like Gumby is what they used to say. Flexible.
That's right. That's right.
Proceeded to bend us in all kinds of shapes and sizes, just like Gumby. Nonetheless,
they meant for you and me to be flexible, not them.
Exactly.
So anyway.
They were pretty rigid, very rigid people.
I'm doing okay, Joe. You and I both came down with probably our second or third bout of COVID, but hey, we're doing okay, right?
Yeah, praise be to God.
It is what it is. A glorious day yesterday, and you set me down a path, which you tend to do with Mother. Yeah, oh yeah, you and Father Murr, Mother Pascalina, and Pope Pius XII.
You're going to blame me for your trouble.
I am blaming you for that.
Did you watch
Father Murr?
Did you watch the film?
Did.
Now,
I did.
You speak German, don't you?
Oh, I understand it better than I speak it. My dad said, we're Americans. We're going to speak American.
Now, because the movie's in German with English subtitles, and it's 2.5 hours long. Were you able to listen in German, or did you read the subtitles?
I listened in German and read the subtitles both. Yeah. And the subtitles are not always accurate. Those are the times when I chuckle, where they kind of change it a little to make it sound good. But I'm also reading Father Murr's book, which is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then, of course, I have a biography of Pope Pius XII that was written in 1956. So he was still alive when it was written. And so I'm going to read that when I'm done with this book. And then Mother Pascalina's book will be my last in this rabbit hole that you sent me down, sir. So it's all your fault.
Isn't she an incredibly fascinating character, though? A strong-willed woman who had a call, and she was determined to see to it in spite of it all. And I just find it utterly fascinating, especially given the fact that, as Father Murr said last week, and that's not, we're going to get into adoption here in a minute, but Mother Pascalina is a fascinating character, buried in the crypt under the Vatican, just, 20 feet from Pope Pius XII's crypt, which was only 20 feet from the bones of St. Peter. I find that utterly fascinating.
I do too, and I think it's wonderful that she is also part of the foundation of the church. Strong women in the orders who have devoted their life to Christ are also a foundation of our blessed church. So
did so much to help the Jews survive from being, hauled off to concentration camps and murdered by the Nazis and the fascists during World War II. And it just goes to further prove that Pius XII gets a bad rap, right? Pius XII did an amazing work during that incredibly difficult time, and yet his cause for canonization is stalled. Hey, but John the 23rd, Paul VI, they all get to move forward. Anyway, I guess that's a rant for another day. Let's talk about adoption instead. My wife and I went through it many years ago. We didn't intend to go through it. I remember getting a phone call one day from my father, said, "Hey, I know of a little boy who needs a home." And my response was, "I hope he finds one." Like, call the next person on your list. But we went to go meet him. And then he was a little tiny little guy living in an insanely chaotic situation, a home for wayward teenagers who had run away from their house. And he was living like a bird in a bird's nest in the midst of chaos. And I'm like, "Get your stuff. You're coming with us right now." And it was a wild ride. It was a roller coaster ride emotionally, spiritually, and financially. It was really difficult. We had to go through a court battle, and it can be hard, but nonetheless important. And it's something you're going through right now. Tell us about it.
It is. And my situation is a little different. We knew the family. We know the biological family of this little boy, and they asked us to come in on his behalf and to foster him. So we started off in a state-sponsored foster situation where you have to be certified. So we went through the certification process, and it's called fictive kin was a term they used. His biological mother called me Uncle Mike from the time she was a little one. And wow. she's going through some tough times and asked us to intercede. And he came to us when he was less than a year old. And so he's been with us now for almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in January that he's been here with us. And we went through the beginnings of the court process here about 1.5 years ago. And he was made our ward. That's a real term. That doesn't just come from Batman. So he's our ward, which means we're his legal guardians in everything except we're not his legal parents. And of course, as a Catholic family, the struggle for us is we would like to see this little boy get baptized into the Holy Mother Church. And Amen. Until he's adopted, we can't do that. And Joe, just let me brag as a pop for a little while. And he calls me Papa, by the way. So I'm not making up words, but let me brag. This is the little boy who you've seen the videos, who goes to the holy water, dips his fingers in and does the sign of the cross, and started doing that before he was a year old. He also wants to put as the movie, The Quiet Man, he also wants to play patty fingers in the holy water. And so, anyone who's seen that movie knows the reference. So anyway, and then when the sacred host is raised in the church, he fully prostrates himself before the sacred host. So, wow. If I had the faith of a child, Joe, child, But he reminds me every day of what our Lord and Savior talked about. Come to me like the children, because and yet
you're not allowed to baptize him.
Well, no. I suppose I could, but what does that do to his immortal soul? Should we not be able to hold custody of that child?
It's a tricky piece of business, because I guess the church's position is, listen, if we baptize the child and he doesn't end up with you, he could end up in a situation where he's not raised as a Christian, but he's a baptized person, and that puts his soul in great danger. So they want to hold off. But yet, recently, according to the Cardinal Fernandez out of the Doctrine Chief, he basically said a homosexual couple can now have a child baptized, but what are the chances that that child will be raised in an actual true Christian home if this homosexual couple's living an unchaste relationship, cohabitating? What are the chances? But somehow that seems to now get a pass. But adoptive parents must wait for the adoption to go through to baptize their child. It seems a bit hypocritical, Mike.
Well, it's and this is where I'm rigid, I suppose. So I guess the earlier accusation is true on your part. So you were right, Joe. I am rigid. I'm
your
not
lips
going
to God's ears, Mike.
Well, stop clock twice a day, all that stuff. But I'm not going to put this child's immortal soul in danger because of the misspeaking. What I believe is the misspeaking of one of our holy leaders. I think he's mistaken on this issue. I pray that Lord reveals what's right to us. I think he has in a book called the Catechism, by the way, the church. If only the church had a book of rules about all this stuff.
If only. And by the way, maybe I'll send him a copy of Credo from Bishop Schneider, or just came out. Maybe, who knows? Maybe Fernandez will benefit greatly from that.
Another one of those books sitting by my nightstand. But no, the Catechism is very clear about this, and so the bishops who say no, you have to wait till the adoption is done, are doing as our church has said we should do, and it's not because they're being meanie headed or any of that nonsense. It's because they don't want to endanger that immortal soul of that little guy, and his parents are atheists. His biological parents are atheists. And so he would not, if he went back to them, he would not go into a situation where he was being raised in the faith. And so I can't in good conscience do that. But, the tough thing of all of this is, of course, is the legal process. And I suppose on the other side of the break, we can talk more about that. But I do want to say this. I got that call. And that call was an answer to a prayer. On previous episode of your show, I've talked about the fact that I committed a mortal sin and had a vasectomy before I met my wife. And so I went to her open and honest and said, I can't have children. I've done this to myself and I apologize. So if you don't want to marry me, that's fine. And she agreed to marry me despite that grave sin. And so as our marriage proceeded, and we've been married now over 18 years, I began to realize that she saw something missing in her life. And I got on my knees and prayed for a miracle. And this little boy is a miracle, Joe. Wow. And to the point, by the way, where when I walk them through the neighborhood and the old ladies in the neighborhood say, "Aren't grandchildren great?" I say, "Oh, they're great, but this boy's a surprise." And then I just keep on walking. so
scandalous, my friend. Wow, look at you rocking the boat in the neighborhood. That's hilarious.
But anyway, my point being that he is an answer to a prayer, and God put him in our lives, and he's a wonderful answer to a prayer, even at 9:30 at night when he refuses to go to sleep. He's an answer to a prayer. And so, it's one of those wonderful things in my life. And Joe, my wife Megan, puts him to bed in the evening, and she sings, and they say their prayers, and she sings with him. And then when she gets done, he looks at her and says, "Papa," and he folds his hands and he goes, because I pray the rosary in his bed until I go through I go through a third of the rosary, one of the mysteries with him before he goes to sleep. So he gets his Hail Marys. He gets his how many is it? 53, whatever, whatever the number is, Hail Marys and his Our Fathers. And so what he hears is me whispering, saying the Hail Mary and saying our Fathers as I pray the rosary with him. So, I thank our Holy Mother every night that she brought him into our life. I ask her to guide me as a father and to do right. And so I hear the music, so I'll let you wrap up this segment.
Let's on the other side of the break talk about some of the legal challenges. You know, we live in a day and an age where Catholic Charities had to get out of the adoption business in places like the Archdiocese of Boston, for instance, and other places because they refused to place children in the homes of homosexual couples. And so the legal process to going through adoption can be tricky pieces of business. You have to have home studies done. Who gets to decide whether or not your home is a good home? And then you worry about every little way you're going to respond to those questions. How exactly do you plan to punish this child if they act up? And you're just like you're overthinking everything. So we're going to talk about some of those challenges on the other side of the break, but why we should persevere through it all, because it is a great thing to do to adopt a child. We'll be right back. Be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. It is great to be on with you. Praise be to God. And can I just say happy birthday to one of our insiders, Sharon? Happy birthday to you. Praise be to God. I would sing to you, but that would be considered rude and unjust to have me singing to just about anybody on planet Earth. So I won't do that. I will not inflict you with that kind of psychological trauma. But nonetheless, happy birthday to you. Thank you for being on the team today. We really love having you a part of our community here. By the way, at the top of the hour, we do say goodbye to the radio audience and we stay on for the live after show where we get more casual, more relaxed. I actually drink coffee over my microphone instead of just, I try not to do that during the radio side, but in the after show, you get to drive that conversation. And if you fail to do so, then we simply talk about music and movies from the 80s. Those are the rules. You just don't shoot the messenger. It just is what it is. But you can comment on the program with one of the live video feeds. If you just go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT, scroll down. You'll see the live video player there. And then just underneath that, you'll actually see some icons. One is for YouTube. Another is for Facebook and Rumble. You can choose one of those and you can actually comment with whatever you want to talk about. It's all on the table and we're happy to do so. But check it out at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Mike Koeniger, friend of the show, is our guest. We're talking about adoption. And he's been sharing a bit of his own journey. He and his wife, Megan, have been going through this journey of adoption. The legal process can be challenging, though, Mike. It can also be very expensive. It was incredibly expensive for our family. And I think at the time, I might have made $40,000 a year, $45 if I'm lucky. And we had to go through a court battle and hire an attorney. And it was rough stuff. What has that been like for you?
Well, it is a challenge, and it does try your patience. We had gone through a home study, obviously, when the state came in and certified us, and because the state remanded his care to us, and they were no longer involved, we had to go through a second home study, and we did go through Catholic Charities as a matter. Yes, we had to do two, and we did go through Catholic Charities. But all the same rules apply. How will you punish the child? Well, corporal punishment is not allowed in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Are your firearms separated from your ammunition? Which I looked at the lady like she'd grown a third eye in the middle of her head when she asked that. And I said, what good is the ammunition going to do me across the house if a bad guy breaks into my home?
That's right. Yeah.
And so anyway, but you have to abide by the law, right? So you do it no matter how ridiculous it is, because you're not in any position of power. They're doing you a favor by allowing you to have this child. The dads, men, if you think you get a feeling that we're not being treated equally, dad can sign away his rights on a piece of paper, a notarized piece of paper, and it's done. Moms have to go in front of the judge and terminate their rights, and they can choose to terminate them, and they can choose at the last minute to not terminate them, and that goes from being an uncontested adoption to a contested adoption, and the difference in price there is thousands of dollars when you pay your retainer to your attorney. And we do have an attorney. He's a wonderful Christian man. And so we're working with him. By the way, Catholic Charities does not mean you're getting a Catholic who's looking at your home study. Right. Which I found interesting as well. Yeah. So she's wonderful. I'm not speaking ill of her, but I'm just saying, don't think you're getting a Catholic. But it's funny to me, Joe. No, it's no guarantee. And by the way, there's one person who does adoptions in this area, and we're talking well over 1 million people in this area where I live in southeastern Virginia. So they have one poor lady who's trying to take care of all of it, and it's nuts. I've been in the court now. Going to go into the court a second time, hopefully here soon. But my attorney keeps saying if you can get it to be a voluntary adoption, then that saves thousands, and it takes us out of having to go through the Supreme Court and all of those things in Virginia, which it could end up in the Supreme Court, by the way.
I think of it, and there's so many layers to and complexities to it. When the state gets to determine the outcomes here, it can be very tricky business, especially depending on what state you live in, right? Whether or not, how do you plan to punish this child when they act up? How do you plan to educate this child? What are your views on this social thing and that social thing? How do you like climate change? I mean, they could ask all kinds of questions. And I don't know about you, Mike, the whole time that I was answering those questions, I'm like second guessing everything. I'm like, oh man, am I ruining this? Am I blowing our chances? I almost wanted to stop and say, can you just tell me what you want to hear so that I can just tell you what you want to hear and we can all just check this box and move on? Like it gets that nerve wracking. But imagine if for one second, you are a sold out Catholic. You believe, and I sold out you're sold out for the faith. You are zealous. You believe 100% of the gospel. And you believe that every soul on planet Earth needs to become Catholic because Jesus said so before they die. So that's what you believe. That's how you live your life. You are not sold out for a world economic agenda of any kind. You aren't into the social reordering and dystopian views that are being perpetuated in society. And therefore, you want to raise your kids in this way with this Catholic lens through which to see the world. College Whiz, do you think they're going to give us that opportunity moving forward as this world gets more dicey? It seems like that gate's becoming more and more narrow, number one. Number two, to your point earlier, look at just how lopsided it is. Father's rights versus mom's rights. In my case, all we were required to do was put an ad in the newspaper where we thought he might see it. And that's all that was necessary to end his legal rights to the child. Mom, as you said, we had to go to the court, and that was an expensive affair for us. But I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think it's going to get harder in an unjust world for good Catholic parents to adopt children and raise them as good Catholics? I feel like that's also under attack, as well as homeschooling and other issues.
I agree. Now, that is not my experience now. Anyone who walks in this home, it's very clear to them what we believe and what we stand for. I mean, the crucifixes on the wall, the holy water by the doors, not just one, but we have holy water in 3 places in our home. The home altar, we believe in the tradition of a home church in this household, family rosaries, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not because I'm a great guy, Joe. It's because I'm so horribly flawed. I'm cramming for finals, as my dad, the deacon, says. So I'm busily cramming for finals here because I have a lot to make up for. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, Joe, because you and I have shared our stories with each other. And by the way, on the air, both of us have done it on the air. It's very obvious now. Do I see it going that way 10 years from now? Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for Bible believing Christians of any ilk, particularly Catholics, because they hate us most.
States like California and Massachusetts, it probably is already there. Yeah, that's the reality.
Now, my wife's sister's husband is a adopted child. He came from a tough situation, and he was adopted, and he always felt an obligation to go and continue the process and look into adoption. And it has been just awful for them. They live in one of those northeastern states that you're talking about here a moment ago. And they wanted bars on their windows because their windows were too low to the floor, and they were afraid the kid was going to fall out the window, and they just shut him down. And this is a family that God has given a big shovel to. They're very blessed, and so they wanted to share their love. They do have one biological child, and it wasn't happening. It wasn't happening. So it is, to your point, in some states much more difficult than it is in others. And here's the funny thing. The same people who make it tough for us, Joe, are the ones that say, well, if you don't believe in abortion, let me see all your adopted kids, right? So
that was one of the points I wanted to bring up, was just that if we're going to have a pro-life culture, we need a pro-adoption culture as well. And, if Christ were king, let's just pretend for a second that Christ is an actual king who sits on a throne and has a court and rules. Actually does that, by the way. But just imagine a world where Christ is king. He wouldn't place a child in a pagan home. He wouldn't place a child in the home of homosexuals. He wouldn't place a child in any other home that wouldn't be raised as a solid Catholic, as a member of the kingdom over which he rules. He would love that child and want that child to grow in grace and holiness under parents who also want to grow in grace and holiness. That is a just society. It's up to you and I to help make that society a reality, though. So let's work towards that. We'll see you guys tomorrow. God love you.